This is Meredith for Real, the Curious Introvert, and I'm Meredith. Here, we explore the taboo, less obvious, and paradoxical aspects of society. Questions that need nuanced answers, not just Google results. My mission, and yours if you choose to accept it, is to make a more curious future for everyone. Each episode is different, so bring your ADD and your earbuds and have a look around. You know, sometimes I get lucky enough to find a person who's a paradox enough for the show, and this is one of those guests. I met this week's guest when I was invited to be a guest host on a podcast called Radio Solo 100 with fellow podcaster Joe Sills. The podcast was designed to be both a safety check-in for the solo Arctic expedition explorer and an educational tool. And that's where the story starts for me. But in this episode, you'll hear where the story starts for the explorer, how he went from a conventional career to living on the edge as a polar explorer, the difference between ego and egotistical, how you can be an explorer without putting your life on the line, and he even shares about some supernatural encounters he had while on the ice. If you end up liking this one, you'll also like the one I did with Travel Channel adventure host Shane Reynolds on what it's like to be a paid adventurer. That's episode 36. All right, friends, keep it curious. It's that time of year when travel is at its peak. For some, that means poolside drinks at an all-inclusive resort. For others, it means summiting the world's most difficult peaks. These examples are opposites of extremes, creature comfort versus merit bragging rights. But my next guest represents a third category of travel, one that we don't often get to hear about. He's known for operating alone in the extremes with the goal of neither comfort nor mettle, but for global education and inspiration. He's a fellow with the Royal Geographical Society and a member of the Explorers Club, who's trained and led teams of major polar and mountain expeditions in the Arctic Circle, Himalayas, Antarctica, Alaska, and the Canadian and Norwegian High Arctic. His latest expedition, however, didn't go as planned when he set out to be the first known person to travel over 1,200 miles alone in the Arctic for 100 days. Today, he's going to pull back the curtain on extreme expeditions, talk about breaking records versus making impact, and share if he'll be going back to the ice. Mindful explorer, purposeful pathfinder, Arctic trekker, Mark Wood. Thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you. That was a lovely introduction. I'm going to have to take you everywhere I go so you can do that introduction. It was nice.
Okay. I will definitely agree to that, as long as I have proper gear. I don't like being terribly cold, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay. No problem. It's not for everybody, of course. So, yeah. Thanks for inviting me on, though. It's a great platform, new people to speak to. We're not going to solve any world problems here. We're not going to create any new ideas. We just allow people to think. Well,
I think we're going to also kind of like introduce people to someone like you. I think that's what's interesting is, I don't know, when I think about explorers, okay, hang with me for a minute, because I kind of think of them in the category of teachers when you're a kid. So remember back when you were a kid and you saw your teacher, it was like in your mind, they lived at the school. They are only a teacher. They were born in an applique sweater vest, right? Like that is their whole identity. I feel like that's how we normal travelers see you, true explorers. It's like, we're pretty sure that you were born on the side of a cliff while your mom was free climbing or something. But that's not the case. You are from Coventry. So maybe let's start from there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great analogy. Because I travel all over the world, and especially cold places, and people think that Coventry is like this fjord of mountains and ice and polar bears and huskies. But it's the centre of the UK. And it's an industrial area. So in the war, it was known for making cars and bicycles and things like that and ammunition for the war. My dad was a factory worker on cars. My mum worked in this same factories as a secretary. I was just talking to a neighbour and he said, I went to the beach yesterday. To go to the beach is equidistance anywhere, but it's about a 2 or 3 hour drive. You don't get many explorers coming from the air. You get adventurers everywhere, but to do exploration is unusual for Coventry. So, yeah.
How did you go from being a working class kid to a global explorer then?
God, great for my ego today. It's fantastic.
I'm really just trying to get a spot on the team. That's the deal.
It's okay. Yeah, it's a stringent sort of testing for that. But so yeah, when I left school, I joined the military. That was my way of getting away quickly, earning some money quickly. I was very fit of running and stuff. So, I joined the military, spent a few years in there. And I think the military taught me about discipline. At the time, there was no wars like Iraq, Afghanistan. It was more of a cold sort of war. And in Britain area, you had Northern Ireland and things, but it was all observations. And then after doing that, I then traveled quite a lot for about 2 or 3 years, back to places that I'd operated in the military. And then I came back to the UK and joined the Fire and Rescue Service, became a firefighter. So yeah, that's the first part of my progression was that. And in firefighting, I think I learned how to work with a team, dealing with very stressful situations, but without emotion. So dealing with car crashes and various other things which are horrible in the moment, but you're dealing with it effectively because you're not using emotion at the time. And I think both those categories of discipline and being effective in the moment helped me in my work for the last 20 years as a polar expedition leader. It's helped me guide people through the roughest areas, really.
So how did you go into exploring? Like, what was your gateway drug into that made it your actual profession?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? How do you jump from a wage, a mortgage, paying for your house? Most people do a 9-to-5 job. How do you go from that to actually giving everything in, including my pension, to focus on literally the unknown, what was going to happen with this new idea that I got? And I think to begin with, it was based around an egotistical point of view. I wanted to do something adventurous whilst I was in the Fire and Rescue Service. So I looked at marathons and adventures and everything that we can look at nowadays, going to the Himalayas, whatever it might be, you sign up to do an adventure. And I was looking at that and somebody said, well, this guy's running a polar expedition. And in short, I had to go through a selection process. And then in a very short story, I then headed into the Arctic with them to do this training expedition back in 2003. And as I say, the first 6 years of that, from being trained to going on a pole expedition to then training people, then leading expeditions, that first 5 or 6 years was based, I think, looking back on ego, the fact that I wanted to feel what it was like, wanted to pull the sledges, get the photographs, and just get the experience out there. I was quite hungry to learn more and more. And it was the true passion to begin with, because it was physical, almost on liking to a different planet. And the rewards when you came back were incredible. It's like you felt reborn when you came back after every expedition. And then after 6 years, I kind of started to break away from the team that I was operating with. And I then moved into education. So yeah, that's how I got into it, really.
When I think about, especially Arctic explorers, I think about the ones that were described in the book In Four Down. It's about the Zeppelin airship. The airship battalion was in the 1920s. And all of the people in that account were very ego-driven, kind of like what you're describing. They were all about planting their flag. And I mean, the whole... Maybe it's just my female perspective, but the whole account is just like a bunch of dick swinging. I'm like, y'all, you settle down.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it sounds like something shifted for you, because it may have started with a degree of that same vein. Was there a certain trip that really was transformational for you? Because ego, I mean, that's a big thing. People, they do ayahuasca, Mark, to overcome their ego. What was it for you that helped you make that shift in how you see yourself in relation to these expeditions?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with ego. I think everybody has a certain ego in us. You've got an ego because you do, and it's not a bad word, you do this platform, you're front and center, with people. So you do it for a purpose that you want to find out what people are about. But there's a scale of being egotistical, isn't there? And, it just depends where you are on that scale. I think my shift, my last 20 odd years have been almost a field trip. So an understanding of myself to begin with. And then the reason why I explore, and then finally really having a relationship with the understanding of the importance and beauty of the planet, not in a hippie way, in a very sort of grounded, Coventry military rescue way. I've come into this trying to understand. And I've stood on the very edge of extremeness and seen great things, which makes me appreciate the planet to begin with before you start talking about the breakdown of the ecosystems, etc. But yeah, so back then, the leap from the ego to what I went into next was really education, because I was coming back and giving talks in schools, because they were the ones that they didn't pay. So, nobody was paying me for this. But it was good fun. I mean, I haven't got children, but you go in a school and they ask the craziest questions. They don't worry about asking like fun questions, and the most obvious questions, which makes you think. And I really enjoyed it. And then I linked up with Skype at the time. And this was in 2010, in 11, when Skype was only 3 years old. So what we're doing now is really born out of the pandemic that we had. Everybody's now connecting through this on a day-to-day basis. But Skype was trying to develop that at the time. And I just rashly walked into their London office and said, look, I've got a great idea where I can link from the very extremes of the planet on this platform using different satellites to create a classroom environment where children can come in visually and watch an explorer operate with his team, and they can ask questions. And now we're sitting here, we're like, oh, that sounds quite good. But back then it was like Star Trek stuff, it's just like, this is fantastic. And I think that the best example I can give of this is we did an ascent of Mount Everest in 2013. And the team that was working with me, there was a cameraman and other team members, Nepalese guys, educators, loads of other people, doing the approach from Kathmandu all the way up to base camp, and then doing the approach to Camp 1, Camp 2, Camp 3, through the clouds, right up to, heading towards the peak of Everest itself. All the way through that, I was connected to 10,000 children worldwide. And if you look at the planet, this is children in Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, the US, all over the world, Russia, all these different places, nationalities that were linking with this expedition team live each and every day. And the great example of that expedition was operating through the death zone on Mount Everest, where it's 7,500 meters up. You're like 2 miles above the cloud level. And you see this on TV sometimes, where the climbers on Everest are sort of zigzagging their way up the mountain. And at that point, I was kind of sat on some ice, and I had a rope around my waist, and I was anchored to the ground so I wouldn't slip off the mountain. And I was connected via my iPad, via some satellites that we had a link with. And there I was, I pulled my mask to one side, 30% oxygen coming in my body, heading towards the final camp on Everest. And I was linked to 200 children in Australia. And in Australia, these children were sat in a sports hall looking up at a screen of an explorer live on Mount Everest in the death zone. And children were coming up asking questions. And then I was just delivering this like 10-minute lesson from Everest, which all the children had a look at. I mean, that's how you measure the success. But I also think that is about modern day exploration, utilizing new technologies to enhance what you're doing, as in we need explorers, but also to enhance the areas that you're operating in. Yeah, so that education was the second phase of my exploration career. And I worked with Lonely Planet Kids and Microsoft and universities in the UK and also in the States. The very first expedition I did, I linked with 18 young children at my old school in Coventry. I got a satellite phone. I put it in the tent. I spoke to the children, and the children had a phone on in their classroom. And I was crossing the Northwest Passage in the Canadian High Arctic, and they were asking questions. Well, that was 18 years later, in 2019. I was linked to 1.2 million children worldwide. So if you're going to say, what are you proud of? If there's any negativity thrown into whatever I do, I can stand tall and go, we did that. You know, I've never really said this before, but the knock-on effect that you have as a teacher, as a parent, as an adult, because we're all teachers in a way, you're so impressionable on young minds. So what you say to them, how you act accordingly is so important to their development, not just in the immediate, but in the future. And I remember things when I was a kid that happened that trigger certain things. And I remember speaking to somebody from Skype, because about 6 years later, I tried to get them together again on a new expedition. And the lady, we had a call like this, and the lady said, oh, do you not remember me? We set it up in the first instance. And do you remember? And she mentioned this young boy's name. And I said, I can't remember him. She said, well, he spoke to you on Everest and he was underperforming. We were about to sort of push him out to another school. And since then, his grades got kind of better, but his attitude changed. I think that's just so important, isn't it?
That's major. That's so major.
It is.
When I think about my time as like a second or third grader, I specifically remember looking at some National Geographic magazines, and there was either an alligator or a crocodile or something on the front. It's a very vivid memory I have of going, I need to go there. Like I remember looking through these magazines and thinking, I need to go there. And so part of me wonders what percentage of kids have this predestination towards adventure and towards outdoor exploration. And then there's the other set of kids that are more predispositioned to creature comforts. How do we inspire those kids? Because the ones that are, you know, like maybe you and I, we're going to like get in the dirt no matter what.
Yeah.
But how do we inspire the kids that really are more inclined to be inside in their gaming chair, to care about the environment and want to be in it?
I know. It's a bit like when you get older and you say you should be outside in the fresh air. I remember my mum and dad telling me that. But I think it's more so about opening their minds to other possibilities. I think adventure isn't just the outdoors. It's about adventure of what the possibility is with your life. And one thing I missed off about the calls that I was giving, I did mention that geographically these 10,000 children were spread around the planet. Well, I didn't look at poverty and, you know, being rich as a divide. I thought, well, we'll reach everybody. So in UK, we have like a school called Eton, which is a private school. So you'd have Etonians, like privileged young people. And then you have children who are homeschooled. Then you have children who are underprivileged, who are sort of funded, and they're all part of these 10,000 children. So when I've got 5 or 10 minutes to speak to them from a very extreme area, how do I relate to every single child? That was my problem. And I came up with 4 things, which kind of relates to what we've just talked about, you know, what is adventure and what's important to teach a young person. And the 4 things are pretty simple. The first one is and I think this is for everybody, you've got to try and have a respect for yourself as a human being. I think everything comes from here. A singular human being needs to understand, no matter what color, shape, whoever you are, it doesn't matter. If you're a good, decent human being, it goes a long way. Have a total respect for you, and things will happen for you. As a corny thing, the center of the universe is wherever I'm standing at that given moment. Okay, so it's that kind of thought pattern. So if you have a respect for yourself, you'll have an equal respect, this is the second one, for the environment. So not in a climate change action way, but just look out of the front door, look at the green grass, look at the mountains, look at the desert, the jungles, whatever it might be. This is on your front door. This is keeping you alive. And even people who live in inner cities who go 9 to 5 with a job and work hard for the families, have an understanding of what your garden is giving you. You know, it's an incredible thing. So an equal respect. The third thing is then, as we touched on right at the start, me being from Coventry, but doing exploration all my life and basically thinking differently. And that's the third one, to look down life like that, but then slightly to the left or right and look at possibilities that can happen for you. Possibilities won't come to you. It might be that you have to step into something that you don't really want to do to begin with, a job that you're not really happy with, but something will happen within that period of time because you're a respectful person and you're a good person. So good things will happen if you get out your front door. And then the fourth one, the final one, is something that I've struggled with all my life because I'm an entrepreneur. And with that, you are focused on your passion. And my passion is exploration. So what I struggle with is taking a step back sometimes and appreciating it and being happy. And I think those four elements will really serve well, but you've got to enjoy what you're doing. You've got to be happy. So, yeah, that's me telling me that, by the way.
Oh, I love it. You were preaching to me too. So amen, amen. I love that. And because from those four things, I'm starting to paint a picture of how Expedition Solo 100 came to be born. But what I'm not sure of is why you chose to do that expedition in such an extreme way. Because as I said, it was over 1,200 miles alone in the Arctic for 100 days. And so I understand Arctic exploration from your personal motivations, and I understand it from a environmental appreciation point of view, because I am that hippie, by the way. And I understand it from a scientific perspective, but I still need you to help me fill in the blanks on why you decided to do it with such extreme measures.
Yeah, that's a good question. And when you say something publicly and you start to grow this and people start to get attached, and then the reality kicks in that this is going to happen, you then ask that question to yourself.
I see.
Because this wasn't about breaking records to begin with. This was about reaching 100 schools, one school every single day. This was the original mission. But after a while, we realized the actual logistics of that were virtually impossible for the time. When you go to do an extreme expedition, I create the whole thing. So I use my logistics out in these, like Canadian High Arctic, and I set that up, and then I speak to the plane company themselves, and I bring in the marketing and all the teams together and my expertise of keeping all these plates spinning. And while you're doing that, people are getting excited, and that's the key thing. But the logistics of actually reaching 100 schools was virtually impossible with the time frame that we had. And I'd counted that it'd be 100 schools, 100 days. So the 100 days was still there. I'd done 50 days in Antarctica alone. I knew that this was doable, and I still think it's doable with the way that I did it. It then came into my third phase of exploration. So egotistical education, and then with the slow sort of field trip that I mentioned, I was working with scientists all the way through this period of time anyway, and understanding the ideas of the environment from a scientific point of view and learning from these great scientists who advise the British government and stuff like that. So these guys are really good. And I would go to them with like 6-year-old questions, why does it do this? Why does it do that? And they're like, oh, he's a good lad. So they were like sort of giving me the answers, but I didn't want to face an audience with lies and half-truths, I wanted to understand it and make my own judgments. And I then thought, well, we could actually turn Solo 100 into something quite meaningful. So I worked with some great climate scientists who do research into the speed and depth of ice, the deterioration of ice in the extremes, to test the soot content within ice and snow, and then to measure the speed of deterioration. So we came up with this idea of like I would take 100 samples, 2 samples every other day, and then take them on my sledge, and we would then bring it back and it would be analysed. And that's a key element for your future questions, by the way, on this podcast, because really the things that I'm proud of are stepping into the unknown, into beginning, creating great educational programs, which nobody's really heard of. I don't care that I haven't grabbed the limelight in any way. We've done some great projects for young people. And now in this new phase, we had an opportunity to do some really extreme great science for people who really care and have an understanding about the planet itself. So that was my motivation, my drive to do the 100 days.
That's so interesting. But why alone? You still could have done 100 days. And as you said, you did 50 days in Antarctica solo. But how did the alone part stick?
I'm an absolute nightmare.
You're a nightmare. No one wanted to work with you. And so you're like, you know, we're just going to spin this and market it as, look at me breaking a world record.
But nobody wants to work with me. So
yeah.
There's thousands of people out there going, we'll answer that one.
I'll get write-ins. I'll forward them to you.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I think, you look at exploration and you go, well, what is it all about? Exploration can be a kid who's in a wheelchair who wants to be the best he can. It can be somebody starting a family. It can be somebody climbing a mountain. It can be a team approach on a couple of days trip, first time camping. Or it can be spending a lot of time alone. Now, I'm sure during your lifetime, you've walked alone on the beach, but you've been alone and you've looked at the ocean and a sunrise or something like that. And it's taken your moment. That's a moment you've had with the sea, with yourself. And I think solo exploration gives you a very different perspective on exploration, on yourself as a human being. It makes you think with clarity. It makes you see the dark side of who you are. Everything about you, everybody is good, everybody's bad in some sort of level and way. And you get a real, you find yourself, man, that kind of thing.
I was going to say, Mark, I mean, I know you're like, I come from a military founded perspective, but you are sounding real hippie right now. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I know. So when I come back from solo expeditions, I have so much clarity to do wonderful other projects that I've done, which are around exploration, but really strange and fun. So I think it gives you that. But it also gives you pain as well. So it is tough being alone. When you're with somebody, they can go, come on, let's get some food, let's keep going, let's do this. But when you're alone, you've got to self-motivate, which can be a learning in itself, but it is very tough. So look, I stepped into this expedition knowing that I could do it. A lot of people invested their time and money and resources into me, getting me to the front line of the start point. And I was tremendously geared up to do it.
Well, I do see you mostly as a very grounded data person, aside from your hippie reflections that you've just shared with all of us. Thank you for that gift. So I hope you aren't offended when I ask this next question, because especially in solo situations, there are a lot of unexplained things that happen in both Antarctica and the Arctic. And so I would be remiss to my audience if I didn't ask you if you had yourself experienced any unexplained, I'll go ahead and use the word phenomenon, while you were solo.
Did you know that there is something? You know about the alien landings, don't you, and the UFOs?
The alien landing? Wait, are you baiting me?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Yeah, you are. No.
Well, look, again, I wish I'd mentioned the hippie side. Maybe I am. When I was soloing to the South Pole, I found it really difficult, quite cathartic in a way that I will bring it back a little bit. My mum passed away 10 years prior to that. She's 59. She died of cancer. And I actually dealt with that situation as a soldier or a firefighter would, that I became very practical in the moment without emotion, as I mentioned before. So I was very sort of practical in helping her. And then she passed away and I never grieved. And people said, well, it's a bit strange, but I just never felt like grieving. 50 days in Antarctica, I grieved. I cried. I was like, it was so good to have that release. And as I was going along, especially towards the end, because Antarctica you go to 3,000 meters on the plateau. So you're actually elevated and the oxygen levels are lower. Not a lot of people know about the high altitude within the Antarctic plateau. And as I was pushing up through this area, I was finding it so hard. And as I was forcing my way forward and screaming and shouting and swearing and stuff like that inside, I had this arm around my back and holding onto my shoulder. And I felt somebody leaning into me and saying words which basically within moments just centered me, made me breathe. And then even though if you still film me from the outside, you would have seen somebody still pushing forward. But inside, I was completely centered. And I felt this encouraging force, or whoever it was with me, relaxing my brain, basically, re-centering my brain. People who know me know that I'm black and white about life, and I have a respect for most religions and beliefs and things. But this is something I experienced. And I experienced it about 7 or 8 times. And when I called for it, it never happened. It just came to me when I needed it. Now, I went then from that South Pole expedition, I went directly up to the Canadian High Arctic. Within a month, I was training to do the North Geographic Pole. And I was training with a guy called Richard Webber, who's a brilliant explorer, 7 times North Pole expedition, incredible athlete. And then this bumbling British guy turns up to go and jump in the river with him. And I was really worried about selling him this because I hadn't told anybody that story. And I just said, do you know what? In Antarctica, this happened. And he said, well, coming back from the South Pole, they were looking for their food drop, him and one other person. They couldn't find it. They did a pattern search and he was just drifted to one side. He felt somebody pulling him over and he found within 100 meters this food cache. And then 9/11 people were guided out of buildings by certain people that there were no idea who these people were. And other things like the example of this guy coming down off Everest in a storm. He lost his team and then his teammate was there. He's like, oh, thank God for that. His teammate grabbed hold of him and took him to the tent. And he got inside the tent and they all thought, oh, you thought you died. And he was like, no, so-and-so brought me back. And he died further up the mountain. You know, so things like this, I'm sure doctors would sit there and go, well, it's a chemical imbalance of the mind in extreme situations where, you know, whatever it might be. But it's very weird to experience that yourself. I lived through that. I experienced it and, you know, I don't know what it was.
But isn't that science? Examining the unknown? I mean, the giant squid wasn't scientifically verified until like 2005. Before then, it was the Kraken, right? So it's, I don't know. I think there's room for...
Yeah, I think, I mean, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a teacher. It's only stuff that I've experienced that I feel confident about talking people about. We only use part of our brains and maybe we're not fully developed yet and we don't understand a lot of stuff. And what we do understand is science. That's the thing. We do get science, but there are still grey areas of science which are unexplainable. So, you know, we're probably at the early stages of all this. But, you know, there's a whole debate in itself, isn't it, of an argument of what it could have been. But whilst you're there, it was very comforting and it's what I needed. And it was a wonderful part of my experience.
And probably part of your internal journey to know that sometimes things work out the way that they're supposed to work out, which kind of leads us into the solo 100 expedition. Can you kind of begin to describe how that went?
Yeah, well, I spent 5 years piecing this expedition together, and we had the Radio Solo 100 podcast set up, which you were involved with, and Joe Sills as well, where we would sort of connect every day from ice and bring people in, whether it's children or scientists, into the expedition. So that was fantastic, like a educational platform. And we also had the film. So we've been filming for like 7 years on starting at the North Geographic Pole. Then we filmed on Everest, then we filmed in Africa with anti-poaching teams, going on patrol with them and giving talks in schools, filmed in Alaska with dog teams. So we had this wonderful backstory of footage. But the main event was this Solo 100, this 100 days alone on ice. And when I got up to the holding area, Resolute Bay, which is a beautiful settlement on the Cornwallis Island, along the Northwest Passage in the Canadian High Arctic. They say it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. That's their kind of thing about that. But I've been there about 10 times over 20 years. The people there are like a family, really. When I went there 20 years ago, that's when I found out my mum was dying on the first expedition. And an Inuit hunter came out and gave us a bit of paper. And I read the paper and it said, phone my brother back in the UK. And my brother said, Mum's dying, you got to come home. So I jumped on the snowmobile and headed back to Resolute and was all confused. And this lady called Mavis came in, who's a young woman who worked for the airline. And she got me back home and got me to see my mum before she passed. So I always had that love of this young woman as a friend. Her son at the time was 2 years old, a guy called Devon. 20 years later, Devon is leading this expedition to take me up to the start point.
Hey Curiositors, just a quick pause to show gratitude to our sponsors and give you some special deals. From time to time, I recommend other podcasts you might like, and here's one I know that you're gonna love. It's the Jordan Harbinger Show. I love it because it's smart without being too highbrow and 1000% ADD friendly. I know, you love it already. I'm a genuine true fan. When I have time to listen to podcasts just for pleasure, not, guest research, the Jordan Harbinger Show is my automatic choice. It's like when you're hungry and someone asks you what you want, and then before you even have a minute to think about it, you find yourself at Chick-fil-A because, obviously, Jordan's the Chick-fil-A of podcasts. Some of my favorites include the one with the man held hostage by Somali pirates, that's episode 115, and the pain psychologist about how pain lives in the brain, not in the body, episode 661. You can't go wrong with adding the Jordan Harbinger Show to your rotation. It's incredibly interesting and there's never a dull show. Search for the Jordan Harbinger Show, that's Harb as in boy, I, N as in Nancy, GER, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode is also brought to you by Insec. I don't just recommend them because they've been such a huge support of the show since day one. Their approach to pest control just puts my mind at ease. Their management plans are based on proper pest identification, not just blasting everything, with an emphasis on avoiding non-target species. One of the owners is a beekeeper, so pollinator respect is always top of mind. They take time to ask the right questions and their work is guaranteed. But don't wait till the last minute to get on their schedule. If you're in the Florida Panhandle or Gulf Coast of Alabama, give them a call, ensec.net. This episode is also supported by the UWF Historic Trust. Listen, a lot of you come to Florida for vacation and there's something you need to know. Sometimes it rains here, and sometimes you tourists, you spray sunscreen and fry yourselves on the first day. So don't plan your Pensacola trip without also getting tickets to the UWF Historic Trust. It's good for a whole week and it's a great indoor activity option. You'll recognize Trader John's where I record the show in the Pensacola Museum of History. Get your tickets in person so you can show an agent one of my emails and get $2 off an adult ticket. Visit historicpensacola.org. Now back to the show. Remember to stay till the end where I give you a sneak peek of next week's episode. I love that.
Look, this is what I'm saying. You've got to step out your front door and create these moments. They're not written down for you. They're just there. 20 years and this young guy is now keeping up the traditions of the Inuit way, using modern day technology. And anyway, him and his friend took me on snowmobiles 150 miles north of Resolute Bay.
You drove 150 miles on a snowmobile? Like the whole way you're exposed to the elements for 150 miles?
Oh, yeah. To explain to the listener, how can I describe it? It's kind of, we've got to use Europe, you see. I know this is America, but maybe it's quarter the size of Europe, this whole vast area of the Canadian High Arctic, and there's nothing there.
150 miles is from Pensacola to Tallahassee. So that's for my American listeners. So for European listeners, what would it be?
European listeners, if they know London, it's probably from London to Manchester. But in between all of that, you've got to think that there's nothing apart from snow and ice. And probably on the vast area of the Canadian High Arctic, there's about 25,000 polar bears. This is spread out, but you do see bears. We saw bears up there. And you've got, caribou, muskot, Arctic hares, all these sort of animals that live naturally in the wilds of this white void of a white desert. And we experienced 2 storms along the way, which is, you're in the Arctic. That's what it is. It's job description time, And it was tremendously cold for me because I was sat on a snowmobile, not doing anything. I had full skins on, like seal skins on, which were nice and warm, but you just sat there, just bobbing up and down on a snowmobile. Sounds romantic, but it's not. And then all the time in my head, I'm thinking, I've got 100 days. I'm going out for 100 days. So anyway, we pulled up at the area and in short, and I don't want to reflect too much on this because there's a lot to talk about the aftermath of devastation that I saw, but I had satellite images and it didn't mirror what I saw on the ground. And without actually getting a map out and showing you, I had one approach to this. My first food drop was 35 days away. I calculated 28 days to get there, giving me 7 days grace, if you like. But the way I could see the ice, the open water, the ice rubble wasn't on the satellite images, it would slow my progression down to about 40 days. So it was a non-starter, basically. I'm not the best at what I do, but what I am good at is not going gung-ho at things. It's not my life that I risk. It's the pilot's lives that come in and try and extract me from these ice rubbles. And they've got kids at home. So nowadays we have a responsibility to understand rescue teams. And I've come from that world anyway. So to me to step off on ice at that point, I probably would have got through, not at the time scheduled, but I probably would have done about a week or 10 days and had to be rescued. What's the point in that, you know? So when I came back, I felt devastated for myself to begin with, extremely devastated, and it still sits within me. I felt a true responsibility to, first of all, my monetary sponsors, who are very good friends of mine and tremendously understanding. And then everybody else who helps me, people who've given me lifts, done the printing for me for advertising this stuff. You know, anybody who's actually involved with getting Mark Wood into a position for his crazy idea. And then there's the audience that we were creating. And you could see the potential in what we were about to do. And Joe Sills and yourself were holding this up with no information. So the whole team, which you were a part of, were in limbo, basically. So when I came home, the first thing I did was I went to Oslo, naturally.
Naturally, as one does.
Because in Oslo, there's a guy called Lars. And Lars sets up dog teams in Greenland. I had 9 hours on a snowmobile back from my decision to Resolute Bay. And I came up with a plan, a master plan within those 9 hours. My brain was working overtime. And I thought, what have I got here? What is good? Well, it's still alive. Solo 100 is still alive. We still have people like you and other people who are still invested into this. We still have funding to continue this year to develop something. We still had the film going. And the central principle of the expedition was to collate all of these ice samples. So I spoke to the lead scientist, Professor Christina Brown, and she said, well, Mark, you came to me with an expedition. I wrapped science around it. We now have an opportunity to create science around a new expedition, which was brilliant. So I went to Oslo to speak to Lars, and in short, we set up an expedition to run from the west to the east coast of Greenland, running dog teams, so propelling the expedition for a 35-day period. So we're dropping the 100-day idea, but we're working slightly north of where other expeditions have been, so like 10 miles further north.
So you had to call the initial Solo 100 expedition because the conditions of the ice did not match the satellite information. The ice was unstable. It would have created a rescue situation, which would have put others in danger. And so for this reborn version of the expedition, you're going to go north where the ice is more stable?
No, we're going to go to Greenland, so a different area altogether.
Oh.
So I looked at what went wrong, and what went wrong was the fact that this was a very, as you enlightened right at the very start of this conversation, this was a pretty ballsy expedition. Okay, so not only was the science, but there was the fact, could I survive 100 days alone? Let's say you go out of it and look at the science behind it. Let's create an expedition where it's exciting. So we use dogs. It's great for film. We can take more cameras. We can definitely take drones, that we can film the whole thing. Imagine seeing this great 35-day expedition being filmed from above with these dogs running across Greenland. Plus then we would take Devon, who's the Inuit guy, to help the scientist to do the science. So we've got a local-ish guy to work along a scientist.
Which, for those who don't know, is so incredible because traditionally, Native communities and scientific communities do not necessarily see eye to eye. And so, what a beautiful gathering of the minds that you've facilitated. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, eye to eye, as in traditions are very different in the North.
Well, and their goals are different. Sometimes it's come across that archaeologists, for example, will say, oh, hey, Native folks, let me tell you about your history. And they're like, you don't need to tell us about our history and please quit robbing our graves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's common for the world, really. But I think what Devon does, he's bringing forward the modern version of the Inuit while still keeping the traditions of what his grandfather taught him. His grandfather, I've met him, his grandfather and his grandmother are still out there hunting or still being a part of that. They're very proud of this young man who's actually working with National Geographic and other organizations. So he's a pretty switched on cookie for a 22-year-old. But anyway, so yeah, he's going to work with the scientist. I'm taking a friend of mine who I've been to the North Pole with, a guy called Vic, and he's been in the militaries and he's a great medic as well. I thought, take a medic along with me this time.
Good call. Good call.
Yeah. And the musher is going to be a female musher as well. I insisted on that because there are female mushers and there's male mushers. And I think we alluded to all this in our conversation as well. Both areas are just as good at each other. My friend in Alaska, Cody and Paige, are a couple. They do the Iditarod Quest races. And Cody would be the first one to say that Paige is the best musher between them. I don't think within the world of exploration there is a divide of sexes, really, because it's equal strength and equal strength of mind, really, that it's required.
Well, there may not be in the practical sense, but in the coverage and in the outer display of those expeditions and those adventures, I think there is probably some inequality where there may be more light shown on the males doing the things. So I'm excited that you're shining light on both.
Yeah, I think with everything, we're moving into different areas, aren't we? And I think in terms of exploration, you do need an understanding of yourself, what you're getting into, and have the strength of mind, what you want to do. Well, that's an ability for everybody to have, for everybody to adapt, if you like, whether you're male or female. And I think nowadays, like sport, females are getting the limelight. And it's people like me who I chaired the Explorers Club Great Britain Island chapter, and we enhanced as much as we could the female workings within exploration.
So tell us how people can participate, enjoy, look forward to this next set of expeditions. You said it's Greenland. When is it happening, and how can people stay in touch with you so that they can see how this story progresses for you and for Devon and the whole team?
So in short, I've just told you a little bit about the next expedition. So born out of Solar 100's understanding of the deterioration of the ice, I then created 3 expeditions. So Greenland is the first one. Later on next year, so that'll happen in May of next year. The next expedition will be in November, and that's going to be in Antarctica. And the 3rd expedition will be back in the Arctic again, working with Devon. So that's how you move forward. That's how you deal with perceived failure. You come out of it stronger, wiser, understanding that, to do this you need, and I'm talking across the board, I'm not just talking exploration, don't give up, keep moving forward and learn from what's happened and make it strong as you move forward. And we've done that. And you can see that I'm empowered by this. And I'm working so hard to get this together and to make it so good, because it will be my last expeditions physically that I do of pulling sledges. So I want to make it something really special and exciting for people to get involved with. So the platform for it, the website at the moment still shows what Solar 100 is about. So it's worth looking at it if you want to. It shows a little film on there. It also shows my back catalogue of exploration, who's involved, etc. And that's expeditionsolar100.com. So that's the website. And then this year, I'm going to be changing the website slowly to incorporate everything that we've talked about today. And I'll be talking to you personally about how we develop the radio podcast as well, so people can get involved in that way. But exciting times ahead. And as I've said all the way through this, you've got to keep opening that door and walking through it. You can't just give up on things. You can't just lay down and let life pass you by. You just got to keep moving forward and embrace everything that you can within your own comfort zone. I see my life as a film, really, and I want the film to be the best film ever with the best characters involved. And that's how I live my life.
That's a great way to frame both the successes and the failures. Nothing really good or really bad ever lasts for very long. And so it's all part of the ebb and flow of, as you put it, the film. I look forward to being a part of the Radio Solo 100 podcast and also cheering you on. I know my listeners will be cheering you on as well. So thank you again. This was really great. Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, you'll also like the one I did with Travel Channel adventure host Shane Reynolds on what it's like to be a paid adventurer. That's episode 36, all the way back. Stay tuned next week for an episode from my Mongolia series, where I talk with a monk thought to be the reincarnation of a Buddhist saint. Until then, keep it curious.